church member, so I can do everything I want. We had more people for the rain, but so many people think they'll melt a little rain. Stay. But welcome to the program of the League of Women Voters. You know that we are facing a statewide election, and also following that will be our own local school board and city council candidates. Right now, we're just focused on the statewide for all. We will have voters forums for candidates forums for the school board and the city council. Presently, the school board is scheduled to be April the 2nd.
And you can, if you haven't signed up for it or email, we do not send like a million emails like some groups.
So, and they are from 7 to 9. The school board forum will be at the administration building on Locust Street. So you're all invited there. We have scheduled the mayoral candidates for the council on April the 9th. And then the next week, I think it's 16th, we are tentatively scheduled to have the other candidates that night. We are having to divide them up simply because of the number. When there are so many candidates, and you think if we give them time for opening statements, closing statements, a minute to answer a question, sometimes they don't give but 2 questions. Time to take in order to have a little bit more time to ask actual questions. We are dividing up and having 2. Not that I like this. But today, we have a special guest. Yes. Karen McCormick is going to speak to us today. And Karen has a bachelor's degree in emergency management and planning and a master's degree in public administration from the University of North Texas. She retired with over 30 years of public service from the EPA. Her career includes 18 years as a federal on-scene coordinator, responding to major disasters such as 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, Deepwater Horizon's oil spills, followed by 12 years as a marine, coastal, and non-point source section chief. Since 2004, she has taught as an adjunct professor at UNT, teaching in the following departments: emergency management and disaster, undergraduate and graduate, and public administration graduate level. She was recently nominated for the Shira Public Servant Award in Denton, which is quite an honor. I have never been nominated for such a thing. And she's going to talk to us about elections. No. Federal and state.
Yeah.
Well, it's government. It's government. What is important to us is elections. And I will tell you, I mean, you need to get your friends and everybody else. I had to ask a woman, why did she never votes? I mean, she can talk, she comes to exercise, but she's never voted. Her husband sometimes votes, but she doesn't. And I asked her, why does she think she should be excused from helping run her own life? Why are you just leaving that? I mean, why do you think it's not your responsibility? So I think we need to challenge people when they say they don't vote. Why don't you vote? Do you not think it's your responsibility? You are part of this city, state, nation, and it's just all of our responsibilities to do it together, and it's don't. We get into deep trouble. But I will now turn to Karen.
Before Karen, I'm gonna tell you about our upcoming event. Okay. So as Sandy brings sends those out, this is part one. I'm gonna be talking about how it works on a federal and state level. And then part two is next month. And Susie Rumar, who is a city council member here, and myself are gonna be doing local level. Okay? So do you want to share a little bit about those things?
Yeah. Elections.
Yeah.
That is the first thing coming up. Early voting starts this Tuesday. Woo! And there are lots of offices on the ballot. You want to make sure you have gone in and printed out your sample ballot, which you can do at votedenton.gov. Our voter guides in the back give you some of those state level candidates. And these are in their own words. We do not filter what they say. So you can get some background on some of them. And then if you go online to vote 411.org, you can get also the county candidates and see what they have said. You want to make sure to vote early, especially in Denton County, because if you wait until election day, it gets far more complicated. Let's just say that. We have Taco Tuesday Social coming up February 24th, obviously on a Tuesday. And that's always just a fun event, relax. They have super cheap tacos on Taco Tuesday. Voter registration events, we've got 2 coming up. We need lots of help on signing people up to vote for the next election after the primary. And then part 2, as Karen said, of how it works. And we'll have the relationship between local and state government.
And Taco Tuesday is at
Wild Cactus Cantina.
And for those of you who don't know, that's on Cedar Street.
Mulberry.
Mulberry.
It's kind of like in what they call the Muse area.
It's a little back alley where it looks like. That is it.
Sometimes called the Muse, those other back streets around the square. Yeah, that's kind of a British word, but I've heard it used in that.
So when they talk, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank the Denton League of Women Voters to inviting me here. First off, and I want to thank y'all for coming out in this type of weather too. So I hope you get what you were hoping for. Just a couple things. I do belong to the League of Women Voters. I am a member, so I just want to point that out as well, so you understand that too. So what I was asked to do is to really look at federal and state powers. And I'm going to get into it a little bit because down the road, they're going to talk about federalism and different powers and things like that. But what I'm going to talk about is a little bit, where do we get our powers from, which most of us know is from the Constitution. But then where do we have overlap? Where do we have things that everyone does, right? Not just the federal government, not just the state, but local as well. And I'm not gonna get into a local stuff, but there are some things that I think is pertinent for you to know here, and it may be reinforced when Susie talks about it next month. So you have to know a little bit about federalism. I hope you know some because you're informed voters, right? But powers are delegated to the national government through the Constitution, which is also delegated to Congress. We have 3 branches, right? So I'm not going to get into that, but they're all delegated down. And then we have what's known as reserve powers when it comes to the state. And I'm going to explain what that is. But the main one I'm going to really get into is the shared concurrent powers, because as we talked about voting, whoever's in office is going to determine what laws and what other executive orders and other things that they're going to do and what they're going to take away. So voting is critical, not just in making sure you get your candidates that you want, but also in this process as well. So what does it mean? Federal powers. There are certain things that are just going to be the federal government. Doesn't matter what, right? They're going to do levies, tariffs, and taxation. They're going to be the ones that can only print money, unless you want to do it illegally. And then they're the only ones that establish bankruptcy rules, nationalization, and so on. And they're the only ones that can declare war. So there's certain things that just the federal government has power. And that's listed in the Constitution. Under the 10th Amendment, though, if the powers are not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, and if it's not in the Constitution, it says the federal government will do this or so-and-so will do this, and it's not prohibited for the states to do it, then basically it's reserved for the states to do. So what does that mean? What does the state do that the federal government's not going to do on their behalf? Establish local governments. We have to have local governments, right? Conducting elections. There's that whole thing going on right now where some entities would like to take it back from the states. In the Constitution, it doesn't say that. That is a state power. Regulating intrastate, anything in their state, not across state lines, but in their state, they have power for that intrastate commerce. Creating and maintaining public schools, protecting public health and safety. They too maintain a militia, which is National Guard. That is their role, and ratifying amendments under the state constitution. The way I want to say this, supremacy clause. So as an example, I work for EPA and I used to respond to oil and gas and do inspections. If a state, let's say the state of Texas, their environmental protection laws for the oil and gas industry are less stringent than the federal government, and I've had this happen where I go in the operation, well, who do I have to listen to, you or the state? Because their laws are less stringent than the federal government, they have to listen to both of us, but they have to comply with the more stringent. Because if you do the more stringent, you're complying with the lesser, right? So it's the example, just the reverse too. So in California, theirs are more stringent. I can't go in and do anything that's not outside my authority. So I can only look at what's in my authority to do what I need to do. But in California, the oil and gas industry had to do more than what the federal government did. It's the same concept, supremacy clause. Federal government, if it's done by the Supreme Court, it is law. So we have a lot of things going on today where states are suing the government, right? Who gets to make that ultimate decision on whether it meets the Constitution or not? Ultimately, it's going to be the Supreme Court. And supreme law is a rule of the land. Does that make sense? All right. So where are we on concurrent powers? There were 6 listed. Taxation. We all get taxed, right? From everywhere, every direction we get, right? Borrowing money, making and enforcing laws, establishing courts, Charter banks and corporations, that was news to me. I didn't know what that was. So I had to do a lot of research on that. And then taking property for public purposes. So we're going to talk about those 6 where we have concurrent. But I'm first going to get into where do you get your authority from, right? So the federal government gets their authority from the Constitution, Article 9, Section 8. So Congress to lay and collect taxes, duties, and excess to pay for debts and provide for common defense and general welfare. So basically, they get taxes. I'm going to show you where we are. I don't know about you, but who likes to know where your money goes? I do, so I'm going to show you some stuff. So you know where your money goes. So they are the ones that are going to take that money and do it for common defense and general welfare. It's basically running the government. Under the Constitution, under reserve powers, again, the Constitution doesn't give state powers, it's reserve powers because it's not talked about. They're allowed to raise revenue for state services. So we're going to talk about that. So, payroll. We all have payroll, right? Hopefully we all work. Some of these, and we're going to talk about Medicare here a little bit down the road, Social Security, FICA, all that stuff. But all those things are federal, right? And we get some luxuries out of that. I'm retired, I get my Social Security and things like that, but I paid into it, and Medicare and everything else. So all these federal, it's only the federal that can take that. Now there is state income tax. Talk about that. So overlapping. So there's fuel and excess tax. The federal and state both charge. Federal adds another. So if you say, oh gosh, my fuel gasoline is really expensive. Well, the government gets 8.4%, and Texas gets 20 cents off of it. There's corporate taxes. The federal government does 21 flat rate. Texas doesn't have a corporate tax. That's why people like to move to Texas. Especially if you're a corporation, there's no corporate tax. There is a franchise tax for businesses where they have to pay. All right. Federal tax, individual income tax, right? Well, we got all that, right? But on top of that, there's state income, and sometimes even locals and counties will also charge a state or city income tax. I'm an RSVP type person, or AARP, excuse me. I belong to AARP because I'm retired. I love to read their stuff that says, where do you want to live if you're retired, right? Because it's best, right? So why do you think people come to Texas? The older we get, there are no taxes on estates, gifts, inheritance, and so on. No taxes. So it's a great place to live if you want to live with your kids and other things, right? So taxes do influence where people live. And we have a lot of people coming here. Taxes also help locals and state. We have a lot of people moving here in Texas. We have a lot of people moving in Denton, right? And so we are expanding. You can look around, drive down the road and see it everywhere. So what does that mean? Sales tax. Hopefully we get an increase with that. And it's based on population, hopefully, but they charge, the state of Texas charges a 6.25 on everything you buy, and the city does 8.25, and it goes to the Denton Tourism Public Improvement District. And I gave everyone, when you get these PowerPoints, a link, so if you want to read up more on it, okay? But our sales tax include food, clothing, alcohol, cigarettes, those kind of things, right? Property tax. Anyone read anything about Abbott want to change property tax here lately? That's a bad thing. All right, so property tax. State of Texas, the state itself doesn't do property tax, but he's talking about lessening what locals can do and what they can do, get. But the city of Denton gets 59.542 cents on every 100. If you're a homeowner, you definitely want to do homestead. And if you're 65 plus, you definitely want to do the 65 plus. If you roast and ranch, you have even more. But Property tax includes, because we all look at our property taxes, and it goes to the county, and the city gets part of that, and then who else gets it?
School district.
School district, right? And what he does, and then it helps with operation and debt. So if he affects our property tax, that is revenue for the cities and the county, and I'll show you how much in a minute, as well as the school districts. So that's a huge situation if he changes that. So what does that mean? First, let me get this, sorry. And then there's lodging and rental car, which most of you aren't going to be doing because you live here. But you have company or guests come, lodging and hotel, and then rent a car. And I gave you the links for that as well. So, remember I said I'd like to know where my money goes? It was really hard to find anything for the federal government. Can I just say that? So I cannot vouch for this source, but it's the only one I found that I liked. And this is, the blue is 1966, and the red is 2024. Individual income tax, you can see it's gone up, but not a whole lot. Corporate income tax, wow. Right? FICA, oh, we're paying a lot there. And then excise and other taxes. So you can see where the federal government's money kind of gets their revenue from. This is a state. I know years and years ago, their number one or number two revenue was oil and gas. Can't say that's the case now. All right? Their biggest revenue is sales tax, about 54% sales tax. Their next biggest revenue is fees, investment, that kind of stuff. You have professional license fees and things like that, right? So that's about 12%. Motor vehicles, about 7%. And oil and gas is only 6%, maybe 7%. All right? So it's not as big as it used to be. It used to be in the top 3 all the time. And that's partly because they're doing solar and wind and all this other stuff. But they're predicting about $194 billion for revenue for the state of Texas for 2025. Denton County. Property tax, 76.5%. Huge, right? So if he messes with property tax, it's going to really impact them. And City of Denton, property tax, number 1. Their second one is sales tax. So again, if he messes with property tax, this is not just Denton and Denton County. This is all the cities and counties, okay? So if he messes with property tax, it's going to impact all local government and schools. So, borrowing money. How do they borrow money? Again, federal government gets it from the Constitution. They can borrow money on the credit of the U.S., which we all know that's wonderful. Our credit right now. It's primarily to fund government operations, manage national debt, and address emergencies like wars. There's no debt limit, and they're usually done through Treasury securities like bills, notes, and bonds. Big difference between federal and state. Again, it's under the reserve powers. States' authority can borrow for infrastructure, which is huge. We all know our infrastructure is really not good right now, right? Capital improvements, and then limited scenarios for operating expenses. They should get that from somewhere else, but they do allow it occasionally. But really, their infrastructure is schools, hospitals, transportations, and those kind of things, right? And they get it from municipal bonds, but they, like most states, have to have a balanced budget. They're not like this Fed. So, but in the state of Texas, they have this clause under the Constitution, pay as you go. And they can do something special, which they did. Remember not this last one, but the one previously where we all lost power. So they did the Texas Energy Fund for dispatching power generation. So they had a separate type of pay-as-you-go for generating power and everything else. And again, I gave you their link here as well. So overlapping powers, again, both the federal, state, and I'm not discarding the locals and the county can do this too, but they usually use it for infrastructure, transportation, and public safety. And the state also does it for education, roads, and public facilities. So this is the one that's in contention right now. Federal governments get sued. Anyone understand the executive power of the president? It's not law. He just decides, and every president's done it, so I'm not going to point out that every president does executive powers. And it's to do stuff they don't have to get voted on, they just do executive power. But if the next administration comes in and they don't like that executive power, they can get rid of it very quickly, right? So that's why Congress and everyone, if they really want something, should make it a law. Because if it's not a law, executive powers can go away under the new administration or the next administration. Lawmaking and enforcement. Now, what I will say, every president has used executive power when it comes to this. But under this administration has been far-reaching. And there's been a lot and more targeted. So I think there's a lot of lawsuits. And ultimately, who has the ultimate decision if it's constitutionally correct or not? The Supreme Court. So just remember, that too is important to know what they do in the Supreme Court. So, authority is, for federal, is to make laws. Interstate, that's between the states, right? It's not within the state itself. Taxation, national defense. And I used to work for a federal agency, so the president gives his direction, his priorities. We have laws that Congress does, and we enforce those. So that's how we work. We do compliance and enforcement. Under the 10th Amendment, it's very, very broad. And I'll talk about that in a second. But mainly what they look at is education, healthcare, and public safety and welfare. So what does that mean when it's broad? Education usually means that they establish the school system. And they're overseen by TEA, right? They also set the curriculum. I can't talk curriculum. The curriculum standards. And they license our teachers. They do more than that, but those are big pictures. Healthcare. States can manage public initiatives such as vaccination programs. We had a great program here. I think the health department did a great job at the Speedway. Okay. But remember, some states didn't want to. Remember, the Biden administration said everyone must get a vaccine, and some states said no. And then I believe the Supreme Court said, no, it's illegal. They still have autonomy. So, environmental protection laws, food safety, and medical professions. And then public safety and welfare. State holds authority over local law enforcement, criminal law, traffic safety, and licensing. So, overlapping concurrences for this. Both create laws, they define the crimes, and they define what it's going to be punished for. Some states have chosen they're not going to look, or some cities even, not going to look at marijuana, right? And things like that. And I think those are in lawsuits right now too. But they aren't going to do it, right? So they choose how they're going to run and punish offenders for certain things. So a state who runs a vaccination program may decide that, or water, supervising water. Everyone knows water's our next worst nightmare, right? Resources. Food safety, health care, all those type of things. Guess where the federal government has it down the noose? It all comes down to money. they can't do much if it's written in the state law. But the president appoints leaders, who oversees and does what they should do. But the money, so much of what we get for infrastructure, so much for healthcare, so much for other things, is supplemented by the federal government. When I worked for the government, EPA, the area I worked in as supervisor was in the water industry. Sewer and drinking water was very important to us. And we had a lot of that infrastructure was out of date. And under the Biden as well, it was the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And there were trillions of dollars giving out. But what Biden's initiative was to make sure that some of that went to marginalized communities, which meant if you wanted federal government funds, you can have the federal government funds that you normally get, but if you want these funds, 40% of it had to go to marginalized communities. Some states said, I'm not going to do that. So great. You don't have to do that. I'm not going to get the money. Do you think they came back and said, oh, I guess I shouldn't do that, right? So that's gone now under this administration, but that's how you change a state through funding or requirements that they have to follow to be able to get that purse string. Another one that's not mandatory, and you would think every state would do it, right? Is this example for overlapping Medicare and the Affordable Care Act. It's a federal program. We have Medicaid, we have all that stuff already in place, but they did it on an extension. And they said, if you want this, there are certain things you have to do. So the federal government initially started off at 100% paying it. Then they permanently moved it to 90% match. That means they have to give 90% and so forth. Who do you think ends up really paying for it? The locals and everyone else, right? Because everything trickles down. But the only thing they had to do was implement the program. So they would get the funding, they decide how to implement it, how to structure it, and what's required, right? Once again, comparison to the state of Texas and California. California adopted it, which covered nearly all low-income adults, which is great. They enrolled 13 more million people under this program. And the reason they said they wanted it was they wanted the federal funding. Texas declined. So there's a huge gap. Medicaid, takes care of disabilities and pregnancy and stuff like that. But anyone that wasn't already covered under Medicaid, that they're not covered under. So there's a huge gap. Texas and California are about the same size-wise. Texas only has 5 million. They said it was largely driven by financial concern, implementing the program, stuff like that. Others have said it's a political ideology. I won't argue that. I'll leave that to y'all to decide which one it is or both. Established courts. We have a Supreme Court. Federal government has a Supreme Court. They're allowed to do district courts. They're allowed to do interstate commerce, taxation, national defense. They're also allowed to do legislation courts like bankruptcy courts, military courts for tribunals. Okay, so they have all sorts of courts that they will do and establish. The state also does 10th Amendment. Does courts too. Texas Supreme Court. Once it goes past Texas Supreme Court, if you go to the normal courts, Texas Supreme Court, then it goes to federal. Federal district courts, and then ultimately to the Supreme Court. And each step of the way, they can determine whether or not they're going to hear it or not. So what does that mean? Vote federal government and states can hear the same case. Can hear the same case. Only though the courts, federal courts, can enforce certain cases. Immigration, dispute between two states, because remember, the states can only do what's in their jurisdiction, in their boundaries, right? Cases involving ambassadors, public ministers, maritime laws, right? Patent, copyright, and ultimately anything under the Constitution arising for civil violations, civil rights violations. So that's under the Constitution, that is only for the federal court. Okay, so charter banks and corporations. This is complex. Maybe it's not as complex as it should be, but maybe I made it more. But there's national banks that are overseen by the federal government, and then there's state banks that are overseen by the federal government. FDIC and all those entities, right? But there's also what's known as state-owned banks. And the state-owned banks, basically, it's where the state has their own Texas Department of Banking that also goes and inspects these banks, as well as the federal government. It makes two eyes are better than one, right? Or two heads are better than one, as they say. Doesn't mean if your bank's not on here, it's on your bid. It's just they've chosen to have both the state and the feds. And that's First State Bank, Point Bank, and all that. I'm DACU, Teachers Credit Union. They're under a different thing for credit unions, okay? But here's a source here. So Frost Bank, if they're in Dallas, they're more likely, anywhere in Texas, they're going to be a state-owned bank. But there's a source here that gets into what all that means. And a lot of banks like to have that comfort, and then you can also borrow differently from the state. Your state-owned bank. So just be mindful. I don't know which one's better, but there's state-owned, and thank goodness there's federal oversight on all banks. All right, and the last, eminent domain. Everyone likes that until it comes to you, right? So we all know what it is. Federal, state, local can do it. The main principle is the property must be used for public purposes only. If it's not going to be used for public purposes, you cannot do it. And the owner must receive just compensation in exchange for their property. If you don't do that, you don't have eminent domain. Yeah, well yeah. But under the Fifth Amendment, federal government can come in and say, oh, no. Even you state-owned land I can take. Isn't that awesome? They can take state land, they can do whatever you want under the Fifth Amendment. So there's this big tug of war between the fed, state, locals, and sometimes the state locals. But federal government has the power on a lot of projects because guess what? Federal funding. So they can dictate and hold the purse strings there too. Because a lot of it's federal funded or offset. And then regulations. Anytime they put a road out there, they have to do an environmental assessment, things like that. And look and see if there's anything there and all these things. And that takes time and effort. But there's all sorts of tug of war. So I thought it would be interesting just to look at the distinction. So federal government usually goes after military infrastructure and public facilities, state, county, locals, public schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Both can delegate that. So if I'm a utilities company and it's for a public service, guess what? They can give me that delegation and I can take the land. It's all as I follow that. They can delegate it down to a private entity that's going to be developed. State and feds have different rules on what they will do acquiring that property, but they still acquire it. So overlapping, state roads, highways, we all do roads. Border security, we all know that happens on the border. Utility pipelines, those right of ways, those are eminent domain. They take those. Water infrastructure, flood control, water supply, reservoirs. It's huge right now. That's a resource that we don't have much of. Examples? University of North Texas. How many of you have seen all that construction going over I-35? If you used to like the New York subway, it's gone. You know, they took all that. So UNT, public, right? State. So here in Denton, they did something in 2020, and also the stuff they've done for I-35. And you voted on the Denton Bond 2023, which was approved. And it's for streets, parks, and a senior center, active senior center, and a library. Okay, so that is how they take over eminent domain, depending on what they're doing, project. Okay, any questions? And speaking of questions, yes, ma'am.
Well, I think it was the 10th Amendment.
Yes.
Where you bring to mind what is reserved for the federal government.
For the state.
For the state and what is delegated. Enumerated for the federal.
Yes. So the state gets their authority through the Constitution, and whatever's not in the Constitution, they'll say it's some, but whatever's not in the Constitution, it's called reserve power, and that's given to the state.
Well, my question is, you mentioned it says reserved for the state,
Yes.
quote unquote, for the people.
Right. For the people.
What's the distinction?
Well, they're considering that when you live in that state, we vote with our feet, right? You live in that state, you live in that city, you're part of that people, and you vote for whoever you want.
Well, it made me think about how some states have referendums, where you can bypass the legislature.
Right. There's a lot of states that are doing that. Even Congress has.
Well, by the Constitution, it should be available to every state.
Well,
Yeah.
it's up to the state. The state has to put it in their
In
own
their
state
yeah.
constitution.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's as important.
No, you're
You're
welcome.
entitled to do that. I think it's more, I think it's right, but I'm not a legal lawyer in that.
Yeah.
So I'll stand corrected,
No,
but I do
the way
know,
I read the Constitution.
yeah,
And you know, the Supreme Court reads it.
yeah, especially right now. Yeah. Yes, please.
You go up purchase this house, it's in the HOA division.
Oh, yeah.
Then I found out that your governor, the HOA owns power.
Mhm.
And for the life of me, I said, well, how can the people that can take the house? From me? How come we can overturn it?
I do not know.
Could you
I
repeat the question?
yes. She bought a house that is under an HOA. And they have all sorts of powers that they, same with mud districts. And stuff like that. I can guarantee you when I looked at buying our house, I made sure it wasn't in an HOA or a mud. I also made sure it wasn't near any utility lines or any Superfund sites or anything like that, except for BPA. So there's lots of things. You're absolutely correct. Also, living in a flood control area. FEMA's late on their flood control, but why? If you're in flood control, guess what? You have the flood insurance and your costs. So there's all sorts of things undertone that you don't know when you first buy your house. You kind of, yeah. HOAs can determine what color, what you put in your yard, whether you have an iron fence or wooden fence, all those type of things. I didn't want anyone to tell me what I could do. Right? I'm a little rebellious. So yeah, and they're becoming almost impossible not to have those new districts.
And the other thing is, they don't even educate you as a first time homebuyer.
No,
About, they don't even tell them.
nope. And there's lots of things too. And I remember when we bought our home, they have to tell you what damages or anything that they've had, and if they don't divulge that, and we go back after them and stuff like that. All I can tell you is there's so much out there that without talking to someone that's education in that, you may miss something, right? And how many of us read all that fine print? Yeah. But yeah, I know HOAs and buds are kind of, yeah. But yeah. Anything else? Yes, yeah. Please.
Yeah, okay, so you showed the state banks that are
Yeah.
here. So First State Bank was a state bank here really long time ago, and we had our accounts there, and then they sold out to Wells Fargo. So how do they come back as a state bank later?
I don't know. All I know is that when I was reading, it seemed simple but complex. There was a lot of forms that they had to fill out and certain things they had to follow, and they had to agree to certain things that the state could do versus also the feds. But I don't really know. That's why I gave that link to that. I could have gone down that rabbit hole and really went to town on it, but I just did the big picture thing. But yeah, I think the only thing I know that state banks are is they're code dual inspections.
Yeah.
Okay,
I just don't understand how you can sell out and then come back.
I guess they filled out another form. I do not know.
Name.
Yeah, I do not know.
Yeah, okay, well, since you, worked for the EPA, am I correct that I've heard in the news that now the EPA is not going to regulate emissions?
Greenhouse gas, yes, you are absolutely correct.
What is the heck? EPA is already sued.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. There were so many things. I retired in December of 2024. I was going to retire anyway. Okay. And I've gone through a lot of administrations, and I'm not trying to be political. They all had their priorities. But I can tell you, and this is for all the federal government, once you take something away, it's really hard to put back.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is, and it's not just the Republican, Democrat presidents in Congress that did these. They're taking away a lot of stuff that was put in place because of. And if you look at the regulations, most of our regulations were actually signed by a Republican president. Yep. Like climate change, state of Texas, you couldn't, I oversaw the national estuary programs. And they all had to be climate ready estuaries. And state of Texas does not talk about climate change. Well, how we got around that, how we ended up working on that was looked at sea level rise, resiliency, same thing that climate change does, just don't work. Today, though, I don't think you can do that.
Was the Denton area teachers credit union on that list? Who owns them?
I don't know.
You do, as a shareholder.
As a shareholder and credit union, but they're overseen by certain regulations too, but.
And you can go vote in their annual shareholder meeting.
I love that.
One more question.
Yes.
If Social Security is the federally funded, how come the state has such power?
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
Has no power over Social Security.
None whatsoever.
Now,
No,
that's a
they-
side, as a side, that's another issue.
Right.
Oh, that's not.
What were you thinking?
Because when you get the Social Security disability, you have to go to their doctor, and then the state determines whether or not you get it. So that's why.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah,
that
there's
was
the
by the state.
The disability determination.
Yeah, that's
Surveys, yeah.
under Medicaid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the-
we can have a whole discussion.
Yeah,
I got a lot of them.
We're really convoluted. Okay, and there's so many dynamics that unless you do it on a day-to-day basis, it's really hard to understand. But Social Security is strictly effective.
Yes, and the state doctors are just private doctors that can hire, they make a medical decision.
But they didn't want it.
That's the disability determination service.
I have one more question.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
I always taught that the president could not interfere in states' affairs. Well, I see something totally different now.
So how, it never has, okay, he is interfering more than he should, I should say, he's overreaching.
That's your,
Okay, that's my opinion, I'm sorry, that's my opinion. But when it comes to federal funds, they'll put in their priorities and what they want, similar to like what's under the bipartisan infrastructure. Because so many of the infrastructure and marginalized communities they hadn't been looked at for a long time. So that administration decided if you're gonna want this money, and Congress agreed, and they put in parameters in there that they would have to put that towards marginalized communities. So funding has always been, okay, because everyone thinks, even EPA gets so much money. Actually, what we do is funnel it out, but we used to put it out in grants, not many grants anymore. But everything, and we used to also pay for state programs for hiring people so they could run the programs and oversee it and implement it. So a lot of the money, when you think about the federal government, is going to be furloughed or shut down. All the stuff goes from the feds to the state, and the state sends it on to the locals. So that ripple effect really impacts everyone. So, and it all runs downhill. And I tell my class, everything starts and ends where? Locally. So local elections matter.
Yeah.
Because what we do can infiltrate and do stuff to the state and everything else. But the key thing is, and if this is a teaser, you come to next part 2, there are a lot of things even the state of Texas is doing, taking away state control. Local, sorry, local. And I'm going to talk about that as well. All right. Any other questions?
I have one more question.
Yes, please.
I belong to both Collin and Denton. When I vote in it, my ballot is not the same as Collin.
Yeah.
We could talk. Okay.
That's something I don't know anything about. I apologize.
What was the question? I belong to both Collin and Denton counties. I
You belong to both.
in either one. But the
what
ballot,
do you mean?
the ballot is not the same. The issues on the ballots.
What do you mean when you say you belong to both?
Because my taxes out, my house is in Salina, but the address is Aubrey because we don't have a post office. So I pay for Collin and Denton county taxes. I can vote in either county, but my majority didn't count.
You generally pay taxes to local, state, or federal jurisdiction. You are living in one of those. Now, some cities actually straddle the line.
That's the line.
They live partially in one and partially in the other. School taxes reach over lines, and you pay that, but you don't really pay both. I mean,
I can show you that.
but you're not paying full county taxes to 2 different jurisdictions. It just doesn't happen. They can't do that.
Okay. We're gonna talk. And I'm gonna bring that and bring it so we can talk.
Yeah.
Because I've been saying, ringing the phone. I've been saying,
You're
nobody says anything.
in Agatha?
Yes. Yes.
These ladies are the ones that probably answer that far better than I can.
Okay.
So mine was a high level type thing, so my apologies if you want to get, sorry, you can answer the state thing. But I will be giving the PowerPoints to Sandy and she can send it out to y'all.
Yes.
I'll put them at, do you have all their emails, addresses and everything? And then I think they're putting.
Whoever
them
signed in,
Need to.
and then we can also, post it,
Yeah,
and then email to our general email list in addition to anybody who wasn't here.
yeah.
And then we have Facebook page that we post.
The only thing is when I send you, it will be a PDF, not a PowerPoint, okay?
Right.
All right.
So,
Here, I think it's funny. But it's what,
The thing you're pointing to.
It's a camera. It's a camera.
They recorded me.
That's what?
They recorded me.
We got that. You had that.